He traveled in India, where Prabhupada was. He's the person having a dialogue with Prabhupada in the book Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers. Of course, being the person who's asking the questions that Prabhupada is responding to. He's managing the Bhaktivedanta Institute that he showed us pictures of. He's involved with so many things, like with alternate dispute resolution program within ISKCON. He's famous among ISKCON devotees as someone who makes things work amongst devotees, helping bring devotees together. And he's a wonderful person who basically probably all devotees like anyone who knows him, not just because he's likable, but also because he's very Krishna conscious. So I'll hand it over to you, Brahmatirtha Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Oh my, what an introduction. Well, I can say Atma, not only is he an attorney and an extreme loyalist, he's intelligent. He also gets things done, organizes, and is not afraid to enter into issues and get to the bottom of things. We need more people like you, Atma, so badly. We do. We'll have to clone you one day. So today we're going to talk about peace. And there's 17 people on now. Didn't realize we're that many. And we'll talk about a peace formula. In the Gita, we are on verse 2nd chapter, 39. Estate bukita sankaya budir yoge tvi iman shrinu budeya yukto yaya parta karma bandam parasyasi. Thus far, I've described the knowledge to you through analytical study. Now listen as I explained it in terms of working within fruitive results. O son of Prita, when you act in such knowledge, you can free yourself from the bondage of works. Now, what's going on here? Big picture. All of you have had this experience at some point where you are about to take an exam. You're in college, you're going for a licensing exam, you're about to take an exam. And all of a sudden you wonder, what am I doing here? Though usually you say it with some explicitive, what the blank am I doing here? Usually put a few explicitives. You can choose your own explicitive. I'm sure all of you can think of one that helps. So, and you wonder, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? And should I really be doing this? And this is the same thing going on here. Arjuna is about to enter a nasty war. I mean, it's like the American Civil War. I study the American Civil War because I think it's a very good analog to the Kurukshetra War in certain regards. There were moral issues, or brothers fighting brothers, family members on both sides. One side had had some semblance of a moral high ground. They wanted slavery to end. The other side also had some sense of America began with the motto in the Revolutionary War, "Don't tread on me." And the South had it, "Don't tread on me, don't step on everything." It wasn't just about slavery, it was just a component. So you have this battle, and I like the Civil War because it gives us a flavor of what the Battle of Kurukshetra was like. And at the Battle of Kurukshetra, Arjuna looks and sees his relatives and friends on both sides, throws down his arrows, and starts crying. Now, If General Eisenhower during World War II went out to the battlefield, or General Marshall, or any of these famous generals, Nimitz, they went out there and they said, there are people on both sides. And I know some of the people on the other side. I don't want to fight them. I mean, we're fighting the Italians, the Germans. If I fight the Italians, he might have been thinking, I won't get a pizza anymore. This is not very good. So, and if he threw down his arrows and started crying, what would you think of such a general? But this is what happened. Arjuna threw down his arrows and he started crying. I mean, crying like, tears. I mean, and Krishna happened to be his chariot driver. And Krishna said to him, you're not behaving very well. And he chastised him and tried to wake him up. Then he starts explaining philosophy to him. And he gets up to this point of analytic study. And in this verse, it's a long purport. And if I read it a long purport at this time of day, I will put everyone to sleep. So I'm not going to read a long purport to you. I'll read a few sentences of it. But I once gave a class at the Krishna House in Gainesville, and I got the biggest compliment I've ever received after giving a class. I think knows this compliment. It's such a rare compliment that hardly anybody I know has given a class and gotten this compliment. It was a young man. He had just joined a couple of months ago. And he said to me, I really liked your class. And I said, what did you like about it? And he gave this such a rare compliment. I still bathe in that compliment all the time. Would you like to know what the compliment was?
Yes.
And here it goes. The compliment was, I didn't fall asleep once. That is such a rare compliment. I mean, we begin our classes with the famous Krishna lullaby. Do you know what the Krishna lullaby is? The thing that you sing and people go to sleep. I'll sing it for you because I should have sang it to begin. Are you ready? The Krishna lullaby. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And then people go to sleep. So we try to avoid that. So here, Prabhupada, in a very elaborate and brilliant purport, which I'll let you, for the most part, read on your own, Prabhupada describes that Arjuna's proposal not to fight was based on sense gratification. Forgetting his prime duty, he wanted to cease fighting. He thought that by not killing his relatives, he would be happier than by enjoying the kingdom after conquering his cousins and brothers. In both ways, the basic principles were for sense gratification. Happiness derived from conquering them and happiness derived by seeing kinsmen alive are both based on sense gratification. In other words, happiness derived from conquering, ooh, I'm victorious. That's sense gratification. And happiness derived from not killing them and being with all his relatives. That's based on sense gratification. Krishna therefore wanted to explain to Arjuna that by killing the body of his grandfather, he was fighting his grandfather on the other side. Imagine that. He would not be killing the soul proper, that all individual persons, including the Lord himself, were individuals in the past. Basically, you can't kill them. Now, so here's my question to you. Does anybody have a problem with what I just said? And you can unmute and speak. Does anybody have a problem with what I just talked about? I have a problem with it, but do any of you have a problem with it? If so, tell me what your problem is with what I just said. Don't be shy. And nobody has a problem with what I just said. Hear it. I'll put it in other terms. Arjuna is told, if you kill a bunch of people, that's sense gratification. Krishna's telling him, and if you don't kill them, that's sense gratification. What's a man to do? Okay, now I'll help you with this. Prabhupada used to quote some of his college textbooks. He would quote the poet Cowper. He would quote some science books. He would quote from books in college. So I am going to give a song that discusses this dilemma. Some of you may know it, some of you may not, but I'll give you a song that discusses what some of this dilemma is. Here it goes. Okay. Does anybody recognize that song? Who recognizes?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
I can't tell you the name, but I know it so well.
Who wrote
Both
it?
sides now.
Who wrote it?
I don't know. How about Carly Simon? I don't know.
Nope.
I heard the Percy Faith version. I don't know who originally
Percy
wrote it.
Faith has a version. That was written by Joni Mitchell in the 60s and made popular by Judy Collins in 1967. I remember it well. Now, why would I play such a song? Because that song, the name of the song is Both Sides Now, and it's trying to see both sides of the argument. And it's an anti-war song, basically. And you go through each verse, and it takes you to, this was the middle of during the build-up to the Vietnam War. And it was a song written by Joni Mitchell, kind of against war. And it was kind of reflecting some of the very same sentiment discussed in this purport. And it's saying, well, if you do this, it doesn't work. And if you do that, it doesn't work. How can I see both sides? How can I reconcile it? Now, the song doesn't answer the question, but the song asks the same questions we discussed in a purport. So I'm trying to give it some relevance for the older folks among us who are familiar with 60s music. Popular music after the 60s doesn't count, we all know. So anyway, so then so here, and what made me think of the song is what Prabhupada said in a purport. In both ways, the basic principles were for sense gratification. It kind of made me think of it. Whatever he does, it's going to be sense gratification. Arjuna is bewildered. Now, I challenge you, what bothers you about this? Well, what bothers me is I come from a generation of peace and love. And I don't like war. I'm not a soldier by nature. I mean, I had army training, but I wasn't very good at it. In fact, I was terrible at it. Kshatriya somehow wasn't, I wasn't born in that body. I respect people who are. So what bothered me about this is, shouldn't we avoid fighting? Shouldn't we somehow avoid war? Wasn't Arjuna right to avoid fighting his relatives? Wasn't he right to do that? Why was Arjuna not right? I mean, come on, we don't want to kill people, Gandhi and, all of that, peace, love, was Arjuna wrong to fight?
Wasn't it? I mean, that's the whole point, that it's from sense gratification, isn't it? I mean, if he was essentially wanting to have his cake and eat it too. So it's not that he doesn't want to kill people, is that he doesn't want to have that. It's almost like, I don't want to put in that type of work. And
Yeah.
and it's almost, and to me, it's very much like, I worked in labor jobs and like demolition. All you
Okay.
had to do, and I had one boss who would always say, "You're not in the business of results. That's my job." And I always look at a lot of, like, just life recently is just, it starts with recognizing the delusion of control. Like, I think I'm an individual, right? So that means I can control everything around me. I can't. But if I look deeper into my life, I try to manipulate, relationships. I try to manipulate results at work or whatever it may be, when really I should just be working to provide for myself or my family if I have it. I should be putting in love into a relationship as opposed to manipulate the person. So he wants a good result that satisfies him as opposed to Krishna.
Yeah.
And
Uh, you said it really well, Moses. Congratulations. You did very, very well. And what's going on here is it's not, one thing is Krishna personally tried to mediate the battle. Krishna himself went to both sides and said, don't fight. The Pandavas went to the other side and said, okay, look, we're Kshatriyas, we're supposed to rule. Give us one little village. We'll live there, won't bother anybody. We'll just keep the village, everyone happy, and we won't bother you. And we renounce the whole kingdom. They offered that. Krishna offered that, and they turned it down. They did everything to avoid a battle. Sometimes it's not possible. Take World War II. There was a lot of attempts. Chamberlain made peace with Hitler, but that peace lasted a very short time. It's one of the more foolish diplomatic moves. And there was a force of evil had arisen in Europe, and there was going to be a battle. We don't necessarily like these things, but sometimes it happens. So there's an interesting history in India. The history of India up until the last hundreds of years, there was very few, if any, religious battles. You had Muslims come, you had Buddhists, the empire converted by Ashoka to Buddhism. They had very low, they had political fights, but not religious fights because it was a place of tolerance. So India had a certain tolerance when Alexander the Great came to India. He said, this is a land I want to learn from, not conquer. But he proceeded to conquer it because that was his nature. Krishna says in the Gita, what good does repression do? And Alexander the Great certainly followed that sloka. And he went to conquer India. But his journalist writes, when they were having battles in India, the farmers could be plowing the field next to the battlefield, and there was no collateral damage. Maybe he has to duck from a stray arrow, but no one would ever think to bother them because fighting was for fighters. And if you weren't a fighter, you left them alone. There was no Sherman's march to the sea where he destroyed everything between Atlanta and the Atlantic Ocean. You don't have carpet bombing that the Americans did in Germany. You don't have that kind of thing in the fighting, but sometimes fighting happens. And Krishna is saying here, these are one of those fights where you may have to do it. And this is a very, very important point. You're doing it because you're doing it for me. And the whole point is not to fight or not to fight. The point is to do things for Krishna. And that's all Krishna's saying here. But some people wonder, why would Krishna tell someone to fight? Well, if you study the Mahabharata story, it's one of those circumstances where it just had to happen. And at the very beginning, when Sanjay is looking on the battlefield and he's telling Dhritarashtra what's going on, and it's Sanjay understood that it was already predicted who is going to live and who is going to die. The battle sometimes it has to go on. But later on, Krishna says something very interesting. A little later in this same chapter.
May I ask a question?
Yes, please. I love the idea.
My name is Lata, and would you say that because Krishna is who he is, we are never to question anything that Krishna puts before us?
I'd say the opposite. You're to question a lot of things. When I read the Gita and Krishna says, I'm the taste of water, I don't question if Krishna's a taste of water because I've gotten past that. I understand who Krishna is and we can discuss why I claim to understand that. But I wonder, how can Krishna be the taste of water? And Prabhupada said, we ought to speculate on how things happen. How is it this way? But we can accept what Krishna says and still question. And Prabhupada told me every time I saw him, he said, ask a lot of questions. So just to blindly accept means we'll blindly reject. So we have a brain, and human beings have an analytical brain. We're talking about in this verse, Sankhya philosophy. It's very analytical. We have a good brain. And if we don't use it in Krishna's service, then we're cheaters. We have something useful and we're not using it for Krishna, or we become fanatics. And Prabhupada said religion without philosophy is either sentiment or, in the extreme case, fanaticism. And we don't want fanatics.
So you said we should accept it, but we can still question it.
Both. Well, you don't even have to accept it. You get a point where you accept it. Now, let me ask you, have you had dinner yet tonight?
Yes.
Okay. Are you full now?
Too full.
Okay. So you had a good dinner and you're too full. Okay. Now, so you've had dinner and you're full. Does anybody on this call need to tell you that you're full, or you know it?
I know it.
Great. So therefore, as you get to study and practice and especially chant, you get to know things about Krishna you didn't know before. You raise your consciousness. You come more to the mode of goodness. The mode of goodness gives us knowledge. And you know certain things, just like you know you're full. You know, yeah, I finally crossed the threshold. I understand that Krishna's invested in this holy name. The holy name's not different than him. But I still don't understand certain aspects. I don't understand a lot of things. And our whole life is going to be like that. We're not God. There's so much we're not going to know. Does that answer your question, or you have something more you want to ask? I don't mind. It's a good question.
After that answer, I feel as full as after my dinner.
Oh, that's very good. Okay. I'm glad. And you've asked a very relevant question. So Krishna goes, now we're talking about a battle here. Then this is Krishna telling Arjuna to fight. Then at the end of the chapter, it gets really curious. I'm going to read you a verse or two because it's so curious what happens. There's a lot of this in the Gita. We have these twists and turns. It's like, you read a good mystery novel. It has these twists and turns in it. And the Gita, to me, is like a good mystery novel. Okay. Krishna says, one who is not connected with the Supreme can neither have transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind, without which there is no possibility of peace. And how can there be happiness without peace? And Krishna goes on to say, oops, I jumped a page here, just one moment. And several verses here, Krishna talks about peace. Let me see. Here it is. A person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean. which is ever being filled, but always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man or woman who strives to satisfy such desires. Krishna again mentions peace again. A person who's given up all desires for sense gratification, who lives free from desires, who has given up all sense of proprietorship, owning anything, devoid of false ego. Oh, Krishna, one day let me be devoid of false ego. He alone can attain real peace. So Krishna ends this chapter with the ultimate peace formula. So look at this paradox here. On one hand, Krishna is telling Arjuna to fight. On the other hand, he says by fighting, that will be the peace formula. To me, that is so amazing. Now, can somebody tell me what a paradox is?
Well, one paradox would be two opposite things are both true.
Yeah, a self-contradictory statement. Can somebody give me an example of a paradox? Give me an example. It's all over the place. I have some examples on my screen, but
I have one.
Yes, go on.
Well, I mean, really, you've been asking about it already, so it's kind of easy. That the formula for peace is to basically be to understand how Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead, the controller of everything. He's the friend of everyone, etc. And then at the same time, if that's how you become peaceful. And then so if you really understand Krishna well, then in certain situations like Arjuna's here, the way to become peaceful is to fight.
Yes, that is part of the paradox. And there's another paradox. I mean, there's so many. Here, I'll give you Yogi Berra, the famous New York Yankee, who was very loose with words. They call them yogiisms. And some of you may have heard of him, some may not have, but he's very famous for mixing up words. So here's one. Nobody goes to Murphy's bar anymore. It's too crowded. It's really funny. And so you get paradoxes are seemingly contradictions. And sometimes there's a very famous one from Hamlet. I have a few examples I picked. This one I like. I must be cruel only to be kind. That was Hamlet wondering what to do to absolve his mother of her sins of arranging the death of his father. So I must be cruel only to be kind. So ultimately, it'll be better for them if I'm cruel because it'll be kindness. There's one from the Vedas. We say that the excrement of any animal is considered very dirty, but the excrement of a cow dung is considered clean. When I lived in India, I cooked with cow dung, and the cleanest families in India clean their floors with cow dung in the kitchen. And that's been confirmed by laboratories that cow dung is antiseptic, and you put horse manure in your kitchen floor, you will likely get tetanus and die.
Did you say that you cooked with cow dung?
I use it as a fuel. I didn't eat it. No, I wasn't making hash browns for breakfast with cow dung.
Thank you.
Oh, but I'm glad you asked. That's you. Thank you for that one. Yeah, no, I use it as a fuel because I was very poor when I lived in India, just a few hundred rupees a month. I was a high school teacher when I lived in India, and I was working at Indian salary and barely that. And so I cooked either with coal or cow dung. It's what I live in a village, and that's what people did. I didn't starve to death. So we have paradoxes and contradictions. Paradoxes are used in the Bible. Anybody think of a biblical paradox? It's easier to get a camel through an eye of a needle than for a rich man to go to heaven. So paradoxes have the purpose in Shastra, in scripture, and every tradition uses it to teach us a higher lesson. A seeming contradiction gives us the intellectual chance to go deeper and understand something better. And that means, as how do you say your name? Lajja? Lajja?
Lajja. It's short for Lajjashila.
Lajjashila. Okay. So Lajjashila asked a really, I thought, spot on question. And do we need to accept first before we can understand? And Prabhupada's solution to it was incremental. You understand something, and then when you do, you accept it, and then you understand something more. But it's step-by-step process. Prabhupada said, I counted it, and then I gave up counting at 150. When Prabhupada says something 150 times, you can assume he means it. 150 times, at least. And he said, Krishna consciousness is a gradual process. That means we have to move ahead. And later on in this chapter, it's very interesting because Krishna says something I didn't expect Krishna to say in this introductory chapter. This is chapter 2 of the Gita. It's really a lot of it's just setting the stage for the rest of it. And then Krishna says something twice in this chapter. And if Krishna's saying it twice in this chapter, it must mean something important. He says peace 3 times. This is the peace formula. It seems on a battlefield, it's the peace formula. That's a paradox. That's the paradox we're talking about. How can you have a peace formula on a battlefield? This is something Gandhi struggled with because he considered the Gita the ultimate book of peace, but he didn't believe in any fighting ever. And he was struggling with that. He had trouble with that. I mean, I'm reflecting Gandhi's own writings on this. So here's what Krishna says. Very interesting to include it so early in the Gita. When your mind is no longer disturbed by the flowery language of the Vedas, remain fixed in self-realization, then you have attained the divine consciousness. And Krishna repeats that same, I lost my bookmark, but he repeats that twice in this chapter. Be careful of the flowery language of the Vedas. What's Krishna talking about here? Here he is setting the stage. You're going to go fight, but avoid the flowery language of the Vedas. What's he talking about? It's a warning to all of us. Anybody have any idea why Krishna is saying that?
Something like avoid doing things for the purpose, for the sake of your own pleasure.
Gail, you're hitting it. Every time I give a class, you always make a good point. You always do. You're good at that. And also, what Krishna is warning us to do is not be, and I'll use this word, punctilious. What that means is too much attention to detail. Now, the Vedas, when Vedavyas, who compiled this Vedic literature, and before he wrote the Bhagavatam, Vedavyas was depressed. He was very depressed. And Krishna, Narada Muni, Vedavyasa Guru, came to him and says, why are you depressed? Have you insulted women? Did you do this? The kind of things that, we feel guilty or horrible about, and we get depressed. He says, why are you so depressed? I mean, he offered him some Prozac. No, I guess not. But anyway, maybe Wellbutrin was needed. I'm not speaking down on these medicines. Some people may need it and it can be helpful. But Vedavyasa wasn't looking for Prozac or Wellbutrin. He was looking for Lexapro. No, okay. So what he was looking for, he was depressed, and Narada Muni tried to probe with him, why was he depressed? And Vedavyasa said, I can't figure it out. And then Narada Muni turned to him and said, I'll tell you why you're depressed. Now, let's say one of you was really depressed, and somebody could walk up and tell you exactly why you're in your funk. Wow, wouldn't that be cool? I mean, all of us at some point have been down about something. Imagine someone could get to the bottom of it in a moment and tell us what to do to get out of it. That was where Vedavyasa was. And he said, you're depressed. Why? Because you've given what's called karma kanda. You've given the flowery language of the Vedas, how you can use the Vedas to improve your sense gratification, and left out the essence. So for Krishna to be saying this to Arjuna, Arjuna was using arguments that were from the flowery language of the Vedas. How if I do this, I'll get a sinful reaction. If I do that, I'll get a sinful reaction. How to maximize my enjoyment by minimizing my sinful reaction. And Krishna says, give up all this flowery language. Let's get to the essence. And again, this takes us to the theme I said at the very beginning. Imagine you're about to take the most important exam of your life, and you say, why the hell am I here? Why am I here? So Arjuna is about to do the biggest battle of his life, and he has some doubts. And so Krishna only has 30 minutes to clear up his doubts, because the Gita takes place. It's a 30-minute conversation. And when these battles began, there was no fighting allowed. They had very strict rules until the conch shells blow. And then when the conch shells blow, the armies line up and get ready to fight. The conch shells had already blown when the Gita begins. So there was only 30 minutes to get to the truth. That's why the Gita is so cool. You get to the bottom of it right away. You get to the essence of it. So, and Krishna then is telling Arjuna, give up this sense of karma kanda, meaning using the Vedas for your sense gratification. Get down to the real essence. And the real essence is serve me. And I didn't want this battle, but it has to be. So now I want you to serve me by doing what your duty is to be a fighter. So that's some of what's going on. I want to stop here to see if there are any questions, comments, or anybody still awake.
I haven't fallen asleep yet.
Oh, I've received that compliment again. You've made my day.
I got a question. Because you mentioned that, and I think I've heard some people mention it's sort of like when Krishna tries to stop the war from happening, and the bad guy says don't tell me what to do, essentially. And that's a sort of encapsulates a lot of human condition. But how does someone, let's say in Arjuna's situation, where they're having this existential crisis and they don't know where to go, but instead of going towards learning, they go the other way?
Ask that from another angle. I didn't quite follow.
What's you can learn when I'm reading the Gita, and I can learn lessons for life through it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's a point where Arjuna could have chosen not to be guided by Krishna and go the other way. He could have ran, is where I'm
Yes.
getting.
Yes.
So how does someone who's chose that in life, running from a situation, how can they sort of learn from the Gita to go to, to come back from that?
And Moses, yeah, well, I think we've all been there and done that.
Yeah.
And we have a duty. We know what we ought to do, and we do something different. And later on in the Gita, Arjuna asks the same question you're asking. Why does someone know what they ought to do and do something different? And then there's an elaborate discussion of the modes of nature: goodness, passion, ignorance. And in ignorance, we don't do what we ought to do. And in passion, we do what is best for us. And in goodness, we do what we ought to do. It's because what we ought to do it. It's just like on January 6th, the U.S. Capitol was taken over by hooligans, you might say. And there was some cops, it turns out, kind of ran away that were defending it, and some stood there. One even died. And one African-American cop was being called the N-word 19 times, it was counted. And he still stood there and did his duty. He didn't go shoot anybody. He just stood there and did his duty like a real Kshatriya, like a real proper warrior. And, it was very admirable. I listened to him speak because I was curious about it. And so if for somebody that runs, they take it as a lesson that I need to build up more character. We all get lessons in life when our character doesn't rise to the highest level. And one person that happened to is Arjuna. He threw down his hours, started crying. But then what do? We do the same thing Arjuna did. We approach a mentor, somebody we trust, spiritual master, mentor, whatever you want to say. And we say, gee, I didn't really rise to the occasion as I'd like to. What can I do to build up my character? Just like you do, Moses, destruction of buildings, which, by the way, sounds like a heck of a lot of fun. But anyway, I could see getting into that. Get rid of all the passions. My gosh, you have a fun job. Anyway, so here you are working a wrecking ball, doing whatever you do. But how do you learn that? You approach somebody who can teach you. And when you make a mistake, oops, I knocked down the wrong building, then you go to your teacher and you take some lessons. How do you do it? We had a surgeon in Tampa nearby me who cut off somebody. Somebody had gangrene on their foot, and the surgeon's job was to amputate their foot so their other foot would work. They've still one good foot. And the surgeon cut off the wrong foot. So now this person had no feet because he still had to remove the bad foot. I mean, it would kill him. So he went from 1.5 feet to no feet. Now, that's a terrible thing. And the surgeon, of course, was the surgeon was sanctioned and everything, but something good came out of it. After that, now every time anybody goes to the hospital, and I've had it happen, they ask you, why are you here? And then they mark in an indelible ink which foot you're going to operate it on or what you're going to do. That's a new procedure that came out of that mistake. So when we make a mistake, it's an opportunity for us to advance. But instead of just advancing in some material way for sense gratification, if we are taking shelter of those who are more adroit spiritually than us, we'll advance spiritually and we'll raise our modes of nature. And knowledge comes from the mode of goodness. So the question was asked by Lajashila before, how do you know things? Well, you know things by getting into the mode of goodness. Then you really start knowing. And by own experience, closer I get to goodness, the more I know. So key, that's why the whole latter chapter of the Gita is a lesson in psychology. Krishna doesn't do it in the beginning. He kind of sets the stage a lot, but the last several chapters are all psychology, brilliant psychology. What do you eat? How do you sleep? How do you know right from wrong? Gets into a lot of psychology because we live in a real world, and Arjuna needed some instructions. How do I live in the world? Now that I know my goal is to serve Krishna, how do I actually do it? What do I do in real time, in real life? And the modes of nature help us figure that out. At our Bhaktivedanta Institute, one of our topics is studying the modes of nature. And Murli Gopal, who used to be in New York, our physicist, has written papers. He's doing another one now on how the modes of nature influence us and how we can tell. What tests can we give ourselves to see if our modes of nature are improving? And that's a real thing we can do. We can improve our modes of nature. And just like when you have your meal and you're full, when your modes of nature gets more goodness, no one has to tell you, oh, now you've gotten there. You know you're going there. And when you're going into lower modes, passion, ignorance, you know you're there. I mean, I know when I go there. And every day we're going to go different modes. And this is, for those of you who ever studied mindfulness, this is Krishna conscious mindfulness. Krishna conscious mindfulness means being aware. And Krishna conscious mindfulness means being self-aware. And when I'm in a lower mode, I become aware. Oh, I'm in a lower mode. And when I'm aware, then I can do something about it. And if I'm not aware, there's nothing I can do about it. So it's a matter of higher awareness. And one of the lessons that Krishna's teaching Arjuna is don't be a dullard. A dullard would run off the battlefield. Don't be a dullard. And if you are a dullard, that's okay, but stop being one now. We're all going to be dummies sometimes. Any other questions? Yes.
Yes, I have one. Oh, Hare Krishna. Speaking, you mentioned how you were referring to the verse, men of small knowledge are very much attached to the flowery words of the Vedas.
Yes.
And so that verse, it continues, which recommend various fruitive activities for elevation to heavenly planets, result in good birth, power, and so forth. Being desirous of sense gratification and opulent life, they say that there's nothing more than this. And Prabhu, you had asked what is, if people have an idea of a way they can express what that means in their own words. So I have I'll do that and then ask my question. So a couple of ways that I would express what that means. One is valuing form over substance. Another would be missing the principle or the intention behind the instruction upon which the instruction is based. So my question is, some persons, at least this was something I used to hear people say a lot. Sometimes it was even used insincerely, just as an excuse not to listen to us Hare Krishnas who are distributing books, who are actually speaking about something deep. But sometimes people would say, I'm not interested in religion, I'm interested in spirituality. But putting aside that sometimes that statement could be made insincerely, but assuming it's made sincerely. So someone who's interested, if I'm interested in spirituality, but not religion, of course, it could be just semantics, but looking at it from the point of view of the person who's making that statement, distinguishing these two ideas, I was wondering if you could please say something about how that verse how you should not be attached to the flowery words of the Vedas, or how one should not value form over substance, or how one should not forget about the principle behind the instruction upon which the instruction is based. How might that relate to someone who's, say, interested in religion, but not the spirituality upon which the religion is meant to be based?
That's actually a critically important question you asked. And I quoted before, religion without philosophy and philosophy without religion, the dangers of those. Bhaktisiddhanta, I'm paraphrasing, I don't have the exact words in front of me, but Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said, religion can be the enemy of spirituality. And that's the flowery language of the Vedas. So religion is an envelope. Like we have an envelope, it gives us boundaries to stay in. But when religion becomes an anchor, it gets terrible. I'll tell you a story Prabhupada tells. There was once a sadhu, some of you may have heard this, a very saintly person who people admired. And he went to take a bath in a holy river, and he put his shoes at the bank of the river. And a lot of people were going in. So he wanted to, and the shoes all look alike. So he put a mud ball in his shoe. So when he got out of the river, he could distinguish, oh, my shoes are the one with the mud ball in it. He didn't want to take someone else's shoes. So people saw him go in the river and he said, oh, the saintly person put a mud ball in the river, in his shoe. So everyone put mud balls in their shoes. So that's the kind of religion, that's flowery language of the Vedas that we could do without. I'll give you another more modern example. Does anybody know why the keyboard is called a QWERTY keyboard? Anybody know the story? There's an example of a tradition with no purpose anymore. QWERTY keyboards. Old typewriters and old timers like me will
It's
remember.
the letters up top in the top row, isn't it? QWERTY.
Yeah, but why is it arranged that way? It's very inefficient. Imagine under the finger, that's your strongest finger in the whole body. For most people are right-handed. So assuming you're right-handed, the strongest finger is your index finger, your right hand, and you hit the J. How often do you type somebody's a jerk? I mean, there's not that many J words. You know, unless you're a New Yorker, then you call everyone a jerk. So maybe that's why. But no, that's not why. Why would the finger that's easiest to use be on the J, and the finger that's hardest to use, your left hand pinky, be on the A? It makes no sense, except for one reason. Anybody know? People don't know. Everyone uses a QWERTY keyboard. No one knows. The early typewriters, before any electric typewriter, had levers with the letter on the end, and you type and the levers would pop up. And if you type too fast, then two levers would click at each other. And I used manual typewriters, so I'm familiar. And they'd get stuck, and you have to stop and pull the levers apart. So in order to force people to type inefficiently and slower, they designed a keyboard that is intentionally inefficient. Intentionally so. Because otherwise, people would type too fast, and the keyboards would jam, and the keys would jam. So it's done for that purpose. Now we all use a QWERTY keyboard, and no one knows why. And they have something called a Dvorak keyboard, which is much more efficient. You can download it to your computer and use this much more efficient, much faster typing. But no one uses it because we're all used to QWERTY. But we don't know why we're doing QWERTY keyboards. Hardly anybody knows. That's the reason why. So you can see sometimes religious rituals can become like that. They can be very useful to guide us. We don't want to, Rupa Goswami says there are two things that can hurt our devotional service. One is ignoring the religious rituals, and the other is becoming too attached to them. So if somebody gets involved in a punctilious way with doing every ritual but doesn't know why, because it's for Krishna, then their spiritual life is going to be very weak. They may be very religious, but they're very weak spiritually. And if someone is really into the essence, but doesn't do the normal rules and regulation that help us control their mind, I don't care who they are, unless they're a special kind of rare saint, their mind is going to get the best of them. The religious gives us an envelope to work in. So we need to keep a balance. And Krishna says this later on in the Gita. Later on in the Gita, Krishna says, don't eat too much. And what does he say right after that? After he says, don't eat too much. Can you tell me? You're muted.
Don't eat too little.
Don't eat too little. And he says, don't sleep too much. What comes next?
Don't sleep too little.
Exactly. Take the middle road. In other words, be a good Buddhist. So take the middle road. Krishna is advocating the middle road of Buddhism way before the Buddha. Take the middle road. So don't get hung up on the flowery language of Vedas too much with spirituality, with religious matters, but don't ignore it either. It's important as a framework. You know, we can get mentally ill from being too involved in religious ritual where we forget the essence. And the other side's true. We can forget we can become totally ethereal and end up not really understanding what's going on by not having some religion. So we need a good balance. But as Bhakti Siddhanta said, the caution is don't let religion become the enemy of spirituality. That is a danger. And the danger is, for example, spiritual life, the modes of nature are less intense in the morning. Those bars, when do bars close? They close about 4 a.m. And when do devotees start their chanting or practicing? You know, generally that time of day, 4, 5, 6, sometime in the morning. So that's a very good time of day for spiritual life. So that's a religious principle, and it's a good one to follow. Can't always. I mean, somebody might have to work a night shift. I mean, these things happen. But we do the best we can. And the key that Krishna is saying in the Gita is he says later on, he says to Arjuna, there is no loss in this endeavor. In this chapter, he says it, and then later on, Krishna again repeats it. There's no loss. So even if you're not successful entirely, you're going the right direction. And that takes me back to Prabhupada's statement 150 times. It's a gradual process. The important point is not, am I become the purest, most advanced, everything? That's false ego. The important point is, am I going in the right direction? And that takes us back to the point of after dinner. Yeah, I'm satisfied. That was good. I've had my great after dinner belch and I'm full. We know it. Okay. Any other questions? I think my time has used up. I think so.
This might be unfair because it's so far away now, but would you happen to remember the very last point that you made in your talk? It was, I think, connected to, this flowery language business and the fact that, the battle happened, the conversation of the Gita happened in like half an hour. Do you remember the last point you made?
Well, the point of that is it's an existential crisis. And Krishna gave the condensed version, just like Reader's Digest is all these novels. And Reader's Digest used to publish condensed versions for people who didn't want to read the whole book.
Yeah.
So this is the condensed version to take us to the essence as efficiently as possible. So we say, hey, this is the direction I want to go, so we can build up upon it and then start studying in more detail. I think that was a point, but if not,
so it's like a appetizer type thing, so that we are inspired to delve more deeply. Is that what you're saying?
I think you put that well, Gail. It is. It's an appetizer. Sometimes outside a restaurant, they'll be serving samples for free, and then you want to go in and eat it. They even do that at Divya's Kitchen on by the Bhakti Center. Sometimes to get customers, they give free samples. So the Gita, it's more than a free sample, but compared to the rest of the Vedas, it's like a sample plate. This is what it's about. Why don't you try this, taste, and if you like it, we have plenty more. Of course, this one's free. The rest of it you have to work at. But the Gita is very, I mean, there are 500 translations of the Gita into English. So it's a quite popular book. I read 2 or 3 of them before I met the devotees. I was wowed by it. I'm not saying I really understood it, but I was still wowed by it. Prabhupada's Gita hadn't been out when I first read it.
You know, on a separate note, I have to tell you that, you know, probably more often than not, I have some kind of super soul experience with you. And so today it had to do with Yogi Berra, because I happen to be a Yogi Berra Bhaktin. And so it was so interesting that, Dharma Maharaj, he's the one who put me onto my first book in Krishna consciousness, which was Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers. Yeah. And he told a yogiism a couple of weeks ago, and it was the one you told just now. And when he said, I don't know if it's because of the way he said it or what, but it went totally over my head. I consulted my husband. He couldn't understand it either. I don't know if it was the way he put it or what, or if it was like a Yudhisthira and Bhishma thing where I just had to go to the right person. But you said it. Nobody goes to Murphy's Bar anymore. It's too crowded, and it was, effortless. So I can't wait to go back to him and let him know that that I had to speak to you to get it.
Yogi Berra was, he just had a way with words. One of his famous was, this is like deja vu all over again. Of course, deja vu means all over again. Yeah. So he had a lot. He said, when you get to a fork in the road, take it.
Yeah.
He just had a way of messing up words that was unique. And I use that as an example of paradoxical statements. Though when we take a Gita paradoxical statement, we learn something much deeper. When we take a Yogi Berra paradoxical statement, we just kind of scratch our heads and go, huh? But I wanted to use it as an example of a paradoxical statement. So any other questions, comments, Atmaji?
Yeah, Prabhu, when did you first read the Bhagavad Gita? Which Bhagavad Gita was it? And what did you get out of it? And then what was the difference when you read Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita? And how did that come about?
First one I read was Franklin Edgerton's. And I wrote a paper on it for my college professor. And I was fascinated by the Gita, and I'd picked it up in a shop in the Greenwich Village, and the book smelled of incense for the next 5 years. I thought this was quite mystical. And I read it, and I was fascinated by it. I wrote a paper giving a summary of what Edgerton's point of view was, and I knew he was wrong. intuitively, I knew Edgerton got it wrong, because Edgerton's point was tat twam asi, thou art that. So his conclusion was Krishna, and the second one I read was Dr. Radhakrishnan's. And Dr. Radhakrishnan says, Krishna is not Krishna. He's an ineffable one within everyone. We refer to as Mayavad philosophy. And when I read Edgerton's and then Radhakrishnan's, I said, that doesn't make sense to me. Krishna's speaking. It didn't make sense to me. And I came from myself. I was already convinced of theism by then without any doubt. I didn't know who God was. I wanted to know, but I knew there was somebody behind it, and somebody, not something. And so when I wrote a paper and I got an A, and he gave me two conclusions. One is the professor really didn't get the Gita, and two, I'm a good BSer. Because I was able to reiterate what Edgerton said. And then
wait, Prabhu, sorry, yeah, if you don't mind, I just want to follow up on what you just said, just to make sure I got it. So when you wrote your paper, were you summarizing this what Edgerton's?
Yeah, I summarized what Edgerton said
without analyzing yourself why you thought it was wrong.
Well, my mind was screaming at me. I didn't like what he said, but my job was to summarize his point of view. And my professor was a Mayavad, and I didn't feel like fighting him. And he was a very decent guy to me. He actually wasn't for him. I might not have gone to India. He gave me a lot of encouragement, but I didn't like it, and I didn't know enough Gita to challenge him. When I went to India, Prabhupada suggested I read his Gita, but it wasn't available in India at that time. So I couldn't, not until I got back to America that was I able to get Prabhupada's Gita. And now there's a lot of Gitas out by disciples of Prabhupada. And Prabhupada wanted that his disciples write exegesis, expansions of it. And Garuda has one, Kalakanta has a great one in poetry, and there's several out there that are all built on Prabhupada's, and they're really nice. The problem is we have a linguistic problem. Language changes. And as time goes on, language changes. And Prabhupada talks about this problem in the very beginning of every single volume of the Bhagavatam. In the preface, Prabhupada refers to the verse 1:15:11, I mean to say. And in that verse, Prabhupada, it says, again, to paraphrase, though imperfectly composed, thoroughly honest people will accept my humble efforts to write this. In the purport, he says, I'm writing in a foreign language. Prabhupada's English was better than mine. His vocabulary was very expansive. He, went to college, and he's very expansive. His English had no issue. He might not know some jargon from the West. So when he driving through New York and he saw a sign, he said, "What's a donut?" So a few words here and there he might not know, but generally his English was erudite English. And when you read his guru's English, I mean, I need a dictionary. And, I have multiple degrees, I'm educated, but I need a dictionary. So when Prabhupada says, I'm writing in a foreign culture, and please excuse my literary discrepancies, he's talking about cultural discrepancies. Language changes over time. And Prabhupada was born in the 1800s. So his language is going to be, it becomes antiquated at times. So we need to freshen up and modernize it while still absolutely preserving what Prabhupada said and not fooling around with it. But we need to put it in some context. And Prabhupada wouldn't have considered, if Prabhupada put it in the preface to every volume of the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada obviously felt that was an extremely important point, because you can't put that many points in a short preface. And that's how Prabhupada ended the preface. So it's a very, very important point. So, for example, right now, if I am speaking in modern 21st century English, and I'll use gender neutral language. Well, he or she said this. When I grew up, there was no such thing. There was only the paternal language. Is only he. Language changes over time. It does. And Prabhupada sometimes speaks in a language that comes from 1800s language, Scottish Church College, Victorian. So Prabhupada expected us to be able to present it in a modern cultural way without fooling around with what he's saying. This could be a controversial issue. To me, it's obvious, but anyway.
It kind of goes back to the notion of like, don't get lost in the flowery languages. Like,
well said, Moses. Well said. Very well said.
I like, because I do poetry too, and like whenever you read it, there's always like a good intro into like, this is not going to be what it truly is, because English is such a weird. It's not. There's English in certain aspects is just limited compared to others.
Especially compared to language like Sanskrit. And you can tell how limited language is by the tenses. For example, in Latin, you have more tenses than we have in English. And then the very simple language, like primitive languages, like Aboriginal languages don't have as many tenses. They won't have a perfect tense. I have had this. Right. These tenses don't exist. Present, past, perfect tense. We have these in English. When you get to Latin, you have more. When you get to Sanskrit, then you get into a whole science of it. So and when we want to get into fine details of philosophy, we sometimes English can be restrictive. Yet Prabhupada's brilliance, absolute brilliance, he could take these complex philosophical points and presented even with the limitations that English provides us. And that was one of the most amazing things when I first started listening to Prabhupada, understood his ability to take complex things and present it even in this language, which has some ability to do philosophy, but not the utmost ability in our language. And Prabhupada would still convey the points. I'm still amazed by that. Okay. Any other final questions? Or I think 7:00 is the time to stop. It's a big honor and privilege to be speaking at 26 2nd Avenue, as we like to say, where it all began. And your loyalty to keeping the program going during these COVID times, my hat off to you at your footsies. I thank you very much. It's really, really, I mean, it's I'm grateful from the core of my heart that you're able to pull this off. And with that, without further ado, I think I'm supposed to end now. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. If everyone, if anyone would like to unmute yourself and then join me in expressing appreciation for His Grace Brahmatirtha Prabhu, now is a great time. Haribol! Brahmatirtha Prabhu ki jai! Jai Gaura Premanandi, Srila Prabhupada.